Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. This is Michael Lev with the Arizona Daily Star, senior writer and columnist. We have a very special guest today, old friend of mine from back in the USC beat days. It's Shotgun Spratling of D1 Baseball. Shotgun, how are you?
Hanging in there. I think we're a little disappointed on the eve of Omaha to not actually be in Omaha. But I digress. We're still going to enjoy watching it because a ton of West Coast teams getting in. We get some representation at least. The Pac-12 is alive and thriving, except that it's not actually alive and thriving.
So just a little background here. Shotgun is not actually from the West Coast, right? You're from Georgia?
Originally from Georgia, yeah.
Yeah. But spent his formative years out on the West Coast covering USC. And even though you live on the East Coast now, you have still retain a lot of those connections and ties. And that's even part of your part of the work that you do, correct?
Yeah, so I still, for D1 Baseball, I kind of am a coast-to-coast reporter. I cover the West Coast as well as kind of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic areas. So I bounce out and back and forth and get out to the West Coast, usually 4 or 5 times every season. And also for my other gig, I cover USC football, basketball, and baseball as well. So a little bit of everything. Whoever wants to pay me, that's what I'm always down for. Still retaining my West Coast ties and, pushing for them to have a lot of success because, know a ton of those coaches and stuff and know that there's some really good baseball played out there, even though some people in other parts of the country believe that baseball does not exist outside of like 6 states in the South, even though all the national championships reside on the West Coast until the last 10, 15 years.
Right. So my usual podcast partner, Justin Spears, is most definitely the hardest working man in Tucson. But Shotgun, I would say you rival him in terms of work ethic. You hustle like nobody else. Shotgun, he writes the stories. He also takes the photos. If there are 2 places that he can be, that are within driving distance, he will go to both of those. You shuttled between Corvallis and Eugene a little bit during the regional round, and then you were in Louisville, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the Supers, which is one of the teams that is on Arizona's side of the bracket in the College World Series. We are recording this on Thursday evening. The College World Series begins Friday. The first game is Arizona against Coastal Carolina, and we will get into that matchup in depth here as we go through the podcast. But the first thing I want to talk about is something that Shotgun already brought up, and that is the West Coast representation in this particular College World Series. If you looked at the field last year, there were 4 SEC teams and there were 4 ACC teams, which to me does not exactly scream national championship, right? This year, we've got 3 former Pac-12 schools. I don't know what you call Oregon State. I guess they were independent. They're going back to the Pac-12, whatever. Pac-12 as we knew it, 3 of those. And we also have, a team like Louisville, Murray State, which is a mid-major, maybe even less than a mid-major, Coastal Carolina, which I think is kind of like maybe the Gonzaga of college baseball, plus, a couple powerhouses in Arkansas and LSU. But what do you make of the fact that the composition of the field is way different than last year and what we've kind of become used to in recent years?
I mean, it's pretty much the same, right? Last year was just SEC and ACC. Now it's just, West Coast and Kentucky, right? The state of Kentucky getting 2 teams in without the University of Kentucky, who made it last year. So I don't know what's going on in the Bluegrass State, playing some good baseball there. But yeah, it just shows you, I think, the parity in college baseball right now. And there's a lot of concern. A lot of coaches I've talked to have had concerns about, especially at the mid-major level, are we just getting iced out here? With the fact that NIL and the transfer portal, and you're seeing a ton of, hey, if you've got a really good player at the mid-major level, you better cherish them for the year they're there. Because if they have a blowout, standout year, then they might be going somewhere else. And we've seen that a lot. We've seen a good number. But we've also seen teams like Coastal Carolina that is actually able to attract transfer talent there, but also is recruited really well there, and a lot of homegrown talent has stayed there. We've seen that with some other teams as well along the way. UConn is a team I think of that's done a really good job of mining lower levels, Division II, Division III, and being able to make some super regional runs. We've seen that with, on the West Coast, UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, 2 teams that have really done a really good job of plucking a transfer here and there, but really just, being able to grow their own talent and keep it. And that's partly that a big portion of that is the culture of these programs that I'm speaking of. If you're a mid-major program, you can keep your team together. And I think you're seeing that so many of these teams that we expected to be really good, think of Texas A&M, a ton of talent coming back off a team that was in the National Championship Series last year. And instead, they add some talent. They add, Wyatt Hensler from Penn was the Ivy League Player of the Year. They add a couple other pieces here and there. You think, man, this team has got so much talent. There's no way they can't be back in Omaha. But it just doesn't all mesh together. Now, they also had a first-year head coach in Michael Early, the former hitting coach at Arizona State. But I think you're seeing some of these teams are not necessarily super teams, but are really talented teams that are pulling pieces from all over, just aren't necessarily coming together in the same way that some of these programs, like maybe a UCLA, if you look at them, went through, took their lumps last year. A ton of sophomores on this year's team were freshmen last year, and John Savage said, we got to learn. These guys got to learn. They had some injuries last year and said, hey, we're going to throw these freshmen in the fire, and, we're going to take our lumps, and we're going to be better for it. And they have been this year. They've been outstanding, and they have a ton of homegrown talent. So we're seeing teams are doing it in different ways. I think that's really fun. But I think it also speaks to the parity of college baseball right now, that there's different ways to do it, and teams are finding different methods. It's not just who can stack the most talent. It's who can put together a best roster. And you're seeing teams, and especially there's more changes coming with the rev share, with the roster limits, all that type of stuff. I think the roster limits cutting down from 40 to 34, I think is eventually going to help mid-majors a little bit more. And the fact that teams aren't going to have 60 plus players in the fall and then be able to cut a bunch of players, I think that's going to make some of those guys that are maybe fringe D1 guys or fringe power conference guys decide, hey, I'm going to go to the mid-major first and try my hand there. And then if I do well, maybe I'll transfer up. So I think there's different ways to go about it. And I think we're just kind of seeing the parity of the play across the nation. And the fact that, yes, there were 4 SEC and 4 ACC last year. This year, none of those teams are in Omaha. First time since 1957 that we've had a brand new field in back-to-back years. So that's really fun and encouraging. And I think if you're an athletic director out there and your team's on the cusp of doing something, and they got some good momentum, maybe that's a program that you want to spend a little bit more on going forward, because it is open. There are opportunities to be able to make a run and be on TV, the national TV. And that's the thing about the College World Series, is there's really nothing else going on. The NBA Finals will end before the College World Series ends. The hockey playoffs, I think, will be over before. So there'll be some Major League Baseball, but it is a big opportunity to be in the spotlight because there's not a ton of other sports going on at the same time. So if you're Coastal Carolina, how many eyeballs are you getting right now through this? Now, March Madness, everyone knows, the stats upon, if you make it to the Final Four and, you're George Mason or whatever, the proliferation of admissions, applications and stuff that you get. I think you see the same thing with the College World Series, and I think Coastal Carolina is a great example of that, winning the national championship in 2016 against Arizona, and what they've been able to do since then, continue to build that program and build that school.
So the first thing that Kevin Schnall said at his presser this morning, they were the first ones to go in Omaha. First thing he brought up was June 30th, 2016. He was like, that was the day that changed Coastal Carolina baseball forever. That was the day that they won the national championship. They defeated Arizona. I was there. It was a heartbreaking loss for the Wildcats. I was like adjacent to the dugout while they were kind of doing all the on-field ceremonies and stuff. And it was tough, man. I was like getting kind of choked up a little bit, I'm supposed to be a neutral observer. One of the things that he also talked about today, very strong emphasis on culture. He said, he explained, he said there was only one player who's left his program without like having a meeting with the coaches, who just like, did the Baltimore Colts in the middle of the night type of escape. So he was very big on that. He was talking a lot about how, money doesn't necessarily buy the best baseball team, right? Like it's chemistry, it's culture. It's a lot of those things. As mentioned earlier, Shotgun works for D1 baseball. And if you're a big college baseball fan, I highly recommend that you subscribe to that product. They break down the sport like nobody else. They've got a story up this week by your colleague, Shotgun, Bradley Smart.
Mm-hmm.
And this story is how the 8 College World Series teams were built and he breaks it down by class and like how they were acquired. And I got to say, it kind of warmed my heart to see that 7 of the 8 teams in the College World Series, 58% or more of their roster was recruits that they brought in. The highest percentage of transfers is actually LSU, even though they're at 58% on the recruit front. Now that's 4-year transfers, does not include junior colleges. LSU is a very low percent of JC transfers. UCLA also. UCLA is actually, remarkably enough, at 93% recruits for their current roster. I think among all this, look, I don't have an in-depth analysis of every sport out there, but like the big 5 that we pay the most attention to here in Tucson, football, men's and women's basketball, softball, and baseball. Softball and baseball to me are the ones where you are most likely to see someone come to your school and stay for 3 or 4 years. What do you think about that?
I think that's probably accurate, because one of the biggest things is that the money has not exploded in the same way that it has in other sports. Now, people talk about NIL, and hey, there are some teams that have maybe a couple $1 million in NIL, and we'll see this offseason if that changes. We did see a huge explosion in basketball from last year to this year, so we'll see if baseball has that, or because of the timing of the House settlement and the rev share and everything else, if it kind of stays similar. But teams that have a good amount of NIL is they have $1 million for a 30-man roster. So it's not, or for a 40-man roster. So it's not like everyone's out there is getting $500,000 or anything like that. There are a handful of players that are getting that type of money. I've heard of at least one player getting like $750,000. I think that's the most I've heard of any single player getting. Now, the thing is, baseball is such a unique thing with the draft as well, that you hear of Dax Whitney from Oregon State. You hear of a couple players from LSU, these freshmen coming in that turned down $1 million plus contracts. Potentially, they were likely to be drafted in the first 2 rounds and said, hey, I'm going to go to college and take my chances. Those would have been $1 million guys. So you see some guys actually turning down $1 million to go to school for less money. And I don't think you necessarily see that in some other sports. Now, we do at 24/7, where I write for USC football, basketball, we have some anonymous, we'll go to some of the Under Armour All-American games, stuff like that, and talk with some of the top recruits and, hey, talk about some of the money and stuff like that. And it's anonymous, so we get some, some of the real information there. And a lot of the kids will actually tell you they didn't go with their biggest offer, because they're looking for the right fit. Now, you have to be in the same ballpark, right? And that's the biggest thing. Whereas baseball, I feel like a lot more teams can be in the same ballpark because the lower amounts of the dollar amounts overall. So I think that really plays into it. And there's just a much more connection, I feel like, with baseball and softball than there is with football and basketball, as far as you're playing your travel ball and stuff, you're playing a lot of the same people, you're playing with the same people. Whereas I feel like on the AAU circuit and in the ECBL and those things for basketball, like you're playing a national circuit much more. You're playing more. I think that kind of lends it. It's much more of a regional sport in that. And that's why you see it's been so interesting to see the West Coast and its ups and downs in college baseball. So I think there's different things that play into it, but I definitely would agree that I think, at least as of now, that is much more likely to see in baseball and softball that you will see multi-year players that stay 3-4 years, and then maybe they'll grad transfer like you saw. It's kind of like the early stages of when the grad transfer rule came in for basketball and football, where you saw kids stay, hey, I'm going to graduate, and then maybe I'll look and see about playing my last year somewhere else.
Yeah, so I think there's some socioeconomic factors maybe that come into play a little bit with baseball too. I mean, maybe a little more affluent as far as the families go that are putting their kids through travel ball. So maybe the money isn't quite as important to them. I will also say I have talked to many, many former Arizona Wildcat baseball players who went on to play in the minor leagues. Every single one of them will tell you college baseball is way more fun than minor league baseball. Like, it is not even close. It is the best time that they have ever had in their entire lives. So if you sort of put that into the mix when you're making your decision, the criteria that you're looking at, I mean, you're going to have a lot more fun playing college baseball. The camaraderie, what you're playing for, playing for a team, playing for a university, whereas it's kind of every man for himself, in minor league ball. I think those are things that also factor into some kids' decisions. One more thing about the West Coast representation before we move on to the Arizona Coastal matchup. I said right before, well, actually a long time ago, but right before we started playing this year's NCAA tournament, that the positive offshoot of conference realignment was that we would have true West Coast regionals, and that those West Coast regionals, because a West Coast team was going to come out of them no matter what. I think there was only one possibility, TCU, out of the three was a non-West Coast team, that would increase the chances of West Coast teams breaking through, because you just have more teams in the super regionals, right? Mm-hmm. Now, maybe, UCLA as a seeded team and Oregon State as a seeded team would have won anyway. But, if UCLA didn't win their bracket, then, or their regional, then another West Coast team would have. Likewise, Oregon State, except for TCU. Arizona was also in a West Coast regional. So, look, none of us like the fact that the Pac-12 is no longer, but I think that's at least one positive side effect. That it ended up to some degree in pushing those teams through to Omaha.
It's interesting because we always talk about, previously we want to see the West Coast teams split up so they can't beat up on each other, so they have an opportunity. And hey, these teams could all have lost in their super regionals and not made it. I mean, Arizona going to Chapel Hill, that is a difficult task, and they go and made it. Oregon State easily could have lost to Florida State. Florida State has an elite left-handed pitching staff, and Oregon State does not hit left-handed pitching good, and yet they found a way to win. UCLA, they got the easier of the draw, I would say, UTSA versus having Texas. Now, Texas wasn't the same team that they were for 3/4 of the season at the end because of some injuries and stuff, but, they could have been going to Austin and having to play there. So there could have been much, it wasn't necessarily the easy path for them to get there. It wasn't like, it's automatic that, these West Coast regionals are going to match up like we've had in the past. I think that's been one of the biggest setbacks in the past is you have UCLA versus Cal State Fullerton. You have a 50+ win Cal State Fullerton team that I can think of with, Matt Chapman and JD Davis and Michael Lorenzen. And okay, they go up against UCLA that has Plutko and Vandertag and a team that goes to the College World Series. And that was a super regional matchup. So this time you had the West Coast. They didn't make it to the super regional, had an opportunity, but they weren't necessarily matched up with another West Coast team. So it gave more opportunity, I think, for West Coast teams to actually advance through to the College World Series. And they did that this year. Now, next year, hey, maybe they won't. But it was really fun to watch and see how that played out. It was interesting to see, those West Coast regionals and see how those kind of played out, because they didn't necessarily go chalk the way you would think, especially in Oregon State losing their opening game to St. Mary's and then played with so much pressure kind of on their shoulders, and you can see them tense and stuff. And Mitch Canham, give him a ton of credit for getting them to loosen up. And the rest of the way, they lost the opening game. I can't remember what the final score was. It was like 6-4 or something like that, 5-4. The rest of the way, they outscored their opponents in that regional 50-6 over 4 games. So they just beat up on teams, both TCU, St. Mary's again, and then USC for 2 games. So, I give an incredible amount of credit to Mitch Canham for getting that group to kind of loosen up and play. An incredible atmosphere up in Goss Stadium. That was the first time I've been up there for playoff baseball. That was really good. But then on the other side, you look at Eugene. I go down there, and I catch the tail end right at the end of them losing their opener to Utah Valley, and they do not respond in the same fashion. And Arizona is able to kind of cakewalk through that regional. And you go, is that good for Arizona that they're able to get through without playing Oregon? Is that bad for them when they go to the super regional? And they get blasted in that first game of the super regional, and you go, that probably wasn't good for them, I guess, in Eugene. But they bounced back and had 2 great games back-to-back and found a way to win, and now they're in Omaha. So it is interesting kind of the different dynamics that has created. And we even saw it before that when it came to Selection Sunday. Because one of the things I was really curious about this year is how would the RPI be evaluated by the selection committee? Because in the past, it's always been, hey, the RPI – you're going to get a little bit of leeway in the West Coast because there's less teams to play. So everyone's RPI just regresses towards the mean. That's just the way it is because of the formula that is set up. So now with everyone spread out, okay, now you're playing different teams, and your midweek teams that you're playing, they're playing different teams. So it created a little bit of variance in the RPI. So I was curious to see how that kind of worked out. And I don't think the West Coast got quite as much love. Now, there wasn't necessarily a team that you could really point at and say, that's going to be kind of the distinguishing point of saying the selection committee is giving the West Coast leeway or not. Maybe we'll see that a little bit more in the future. But I thought it was interesting to see, USC and Arizona State kind of right there on the bubble with RPIs that you thought would be pretty safe necessarily, but still right there in the mix. So maybe the RPI, you're not going to get as much leeway in the future. So I thought that was interesting as one of the side effects of the diaspora of the Pac-12.
Right. So as I mentioned, Shotgun he's coast to coast. So he was up at Oregon State, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Beavers later. But you also were able to see Coastal Carolina this year, and they are literally all the way on the other side of the country. Tell us about what you saw and what you think of that team, which is going to be facing Arizona on Friday. They're 53-11. They've won 23 games in a row. They swept their way through the regional and the super regional, winning at Auburn, which is a very impressive feat. So what do you think about the Chanticleers?
Yeah, I love the mascot to begin with. I love Myrtle Beach. Having been there as a kid for family vacations and stuff, but I saw them on a whim, actually. I went to go see actually a George Mason and Rhode Island game, I believe. I get an absolute deluge, pouring down rain. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be done. Is there another game I can go to? They're playing, Coastal Carolina is playing at James Madison. It's 2.5 hours away. And I said, you know what? I can make it. They were they were finishing a game from the previous day that had been rained out themselves. So they had a couple innings left. So I was like, I'll drive that direction. And hey, if that game ends really quickly and they're going to start and I'm going to miss a bunch of it, I'll just turn it back around. I'll go to a different game. But the game goes into extra innings. They rally to win that game. And then, put it on James Madison again in the second game. So it was really fun to kind of see them. Just like I said, kind of on a whim. I wouldn't normally see them. James Madison's kind of the limit of where I would drive to normally in my coverage area. So that's about the only team they play up there. So it just happened to work out that way. And I had no pre-research of them because I'm literally going on a whim. So normally I've researched a team. I've, looked them up and read some stuff about them. I'm just on the way and, listening to the radio broadcast of the first game and then talking with the coaches and stuff before and after the game when I get there. And their offense doesn't necessarily stand out. It's just some guys that hit line drives. They do the right thing. Like they just do everything. It's crisp. That's the best word I can describe Coastal Carolina with. They're not overpowering in any form or fashion on the offensive side. Now, Caden Bodine, their catcher, is a legit prospect. He could be in the bigs next year. Like that's how good of a receiver he is. And he's shown a little bit more pop in the second half of the season. Sebastian Alexander's hit 10 home runs for him, but they're not really a home run team. They're going to drive the ball, line drives more. But Bodine is a type of guy that could have easily left. He could have easily went to an SEC school, an ACC school. They would have taken him with open arms, and he's going to be a draft pick in the first couple rounds coming up next month. But he is spectacular behind the plate. Just talking with the James Madison coach afterwards, he just raved about Caden Bodine. He's a former catcher, the James Madison coach, who forgive me, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was just super effusive in his praise of Bodine, just talking about his skills as a catcher. But the real treat of Coastal Carolina is watching them on the mound. They have a legit 3-man rotation, which is something like you say that, and it sounds like everyone's got a 3-man rotation, right? I saw so many teams this year, and it felt like the first year where it was just so many teams had 2 starters and 2 guys in the pen. And then everything else was kind of a toss-up in between. There were so many teams I felt like, especially watching the Big Ten this year with USC, UCLA there, and seeing a bunch of those games, so many programs in the Big Ten that would have 2 guys and then kind of a black hole on Sunday. We'll figure it out. We'll piece it together type of thing. Some guy, maybe a guy that's up and down throughout the season, or just straight up bullpenning it on Sundays. It was so rare to see teams with 3 true starters, and Coastal Carolina is one of those teams that definitely has that. They have Jacob Morrison on Friday, 11-0, 2.15 ERA, spectacular. Cameron Fluke is the guy that I got to see. Again, I don't know anything about him. I just show up and I'm looking at it, and first couple radar pitches on the radar gun, 96, 97. I'm okay. We're seeing some talent here at Coastal Carolina. And he's a sophomore. He's a kid that is continuing to grow. He's gotten better and better as the season has gone along as well. He's got 2 big breaking balls. They're really good, really sharp. He is going to be a big leaguer. Talking with Kevin Schnall after that game that I saw them, he's like, yeah, this guy is a big leaguer. He's still tapping into his potential. So that tells you a lot about a sophomore, big body, 6'4", I think, 220, just a big guy. And then probably their best pitcher is actually their Sunday guy, Riley Eckhoff, who's not a stuff guy in the same regard, but he's a senior, 6-2 on the season, 2.90 ERA. He doesn't strike out a ton of guys in the same fashion that Flukie and Morrison do, but he just attacks over and over and over. He doesn't give anybody anything. And talking with some people, they've said it's kind of suffocating to go against him. He's like, he suffocates you with strikes. He doesn't let you breathe when it comes to that. And they've got a couple of big arms in the bullpen. Now they have Colin McKay, who's a Virginia transfer, who's a guy actually that got hurt at the beginning of the season. And he's a guy that I was really high on seeing him at Virginia before. But that tells you about the depth of this program, that they can sustain an injury like that, a guy that, could be a Friday guy for a lot of programs, and he gets injured in the beginning of the season, pitches 3 starts, I think, and they're able to fill it in because they got Ryan Lynch has been amazing for them out of the bullpen, kind of as a swing guy, as their closer. You can go multiple innings if they need him to. And then maybe the guy with the best stuff in the bullpen is Dominic Carbone. I didn't get a chance to see him. He finished off the game, the continuation game as I was driving there, but just listening to the broadcast, they were raving about his stuff as well. And, Kevin Schnall had really nice things to say about him after the game as well. So a ton of talent on a team that, you may call them a mid-major, but they don't play like a mid-major.
Right. So I think it surprised a lot of people when they announced that Riley Eckhoff would be starting this first game against Arizona, because he hasn't been their number 1 starter. He is the very experienced player, to be sure. But I would say that if he is someone who is more of a pitchability guy than someone who relies on great stuff, that's maybe the matchup that Coastal Carolina is trying to exploit, because Arizona has had more problems most of the time with guys who don't throw that hard, guys who throw a lot of breaking pitches, guys who have a changeup, especially lefties. I know he's not a lefty, but wouldn't surprise me at all if he gave them trouble. Just looking at his profile and hearing you talk about him sort of reminds me a little bit of Griffin Ness, who was the opening starter for Cal Poly. And Arizona they had 2 hits in that game against Cal Poly. They won the game, 2 hits the entire game. Not a lot of hard contact either. So it's a little bit worrisome. You're talking about the 3 starting pitchers. Arizona theoretically had that going for them, and then things kind of fell apart. They really have 2. One is Owen Kramkowski, who's going to start on Friday, sophomore from around here, Walden Grove High School, and then Smith Bailey, absolutely spectacular freshman season from the Phoenix area. I think they're going to go Cram and then Smith Bailey on Sunday. And Raul Garezar had become the number 2 starter. He's kind of faltered lately, might be more useful as a bullpen guy. My biggest concern for Arizona in this College World Series is they don't have the pitching depth that a team like Coastal Carolina has, where, you got to have, it's how many games and how many days, right? Like the whole tournament goes from, it's 11 days, I think, right? Isn't it like the 13th through the 23rd? And you could play as many as 6 games if things don't go your way, right? So that worries me a lot. So I think they're like 2 players that I'm really focusing on that are the keys for Arizona. One is Owen Kramkowski. Really bad outing against North Carolina. It was very much like his first start of the season, which was in the Shriners Children's College Classic down there in Arlington. Like, he didn't get out of the first inning in that first start. He didn't get out of the second inning in this one. He's still a young developing player. He was a sophomore this year, but he only pitched like an inning as freshman year. And he's skinny. Like this guy's, he's going to put on like 20 pounds before all is said and done. He does throw in the mid 90s, but sometimes he throws too many strikes. Like he's not in his margins, which is what they talk about all the time. And he gets hit a lot. Like he's given up, I think, 107 hits in 87 innings. He relies on great control. He's top 30 in the nation on fewest walks allowed per 9 innings. But I think they need a really good first start from him to give themselves a chance against a Coastal Carolina team that we know can pitch, right? Like on paper, that is a low-scoring game. My other guy that I think is the key for Arizona in the College World Series is Brendan Summerhill, who is projected as a first-round pick. He's their leadoff hitter. He had 2 significant injuries this season. One of them was a broken hand, and the other one was a hamstring. And he's not 100%. He's gutting it out. He's playing anyway. Hasn't really quite been himself. Like his timing just looks a little bit off. Like when he's getting fastballs, a lot of them he's ending up fouling them off to the left side, which shows me that he's just a little bit late. Hasn't had quite the power, but he does have a great eye, and he can get on base. He can be a real disruptor. And the more guys you can get on base in front of Mason White, who's red hot, batting in that 3 hole, the better it is for Arizona. So those are kind of my takes on the Wildcats. I know you have covered Arizona from time to time, especially at the Pac-12 tournament in Scottsdale. You've talked to Chip Hale multiple times. What are your impressions of Chip's program and maybe what you see out of this year's team?
Yeah, and I got a chance to see them at West Virginia, a very hostile place, and in a rubber match, and they were able to come through in that.
That was a game. That was a spicy game.
That was also the game where Summerhill got hurt actually the first time, and then same on the other side, West Virginia loses Sam White because of a celebration. The forearm, the forearm bash and throws out his shoulder. So yeah, it was a crazy game, kind of all over the place, and it was a super tight game. And then suddenly Arizona blew it open at the end. So you look at the final score and you say, oh, that wasn't close, but that's definitely not the way the game played out for sure. But it showed me a lot. Smith Bailey in that one, getting a chance to see him, that's a big situation. It's not necessarily the first time he was put in a big situation this season, but probably the one with the biggest atmosphere at that point in his career. So, and he was a little bit up and down, but the bullpen was fantastic as they have been throughout the season. And I think that really showed me that part of their team, which I didn't necessarily know about at that time, that they had as many arms and, that Tony Pluta could be Tony Pluta, what he has become. Summerhill is such a difference maker when he's going. And you talk about, he's still getting on base, yes, but like since he came back from the injury, what is he? He was batting .417, I think, and now he's batting .358. Like that's a huge difference. Now he's got a couple games where he's been really good. I think if he goes, it just changes the dynamic of that offense so much. I know Mason White is going, but Mason White is prone to going into slumps as well. If teams have a really good plan against him and they execute it well, they can get him out. He can also be red hot and do what he did. Him and Aaron Walton, what they did up in Eugene. So, it's a unique lineup that's not necessarily consistent, but if Brendan Summerhill gets going, it just puts so much more pressure on the opposing defense as well as the opposing pitcher to be able to throw strikes and to be able to, attack the next couple batters. So I think he is a huge key for them. I think it's interesting that Eichhoff is going, and I don't know if it's necessarily, you got a chance to listen to the press conference. I have not yet. I don't know if anyone asked what the reasoning was necessarily, but Eichhoff didn't pitch last weekend. So there's always that dilemma, if you go, you win your regional, you win your 2 games or you win your 3 games, your Tuesday starter or your Sunday starter may not be used a lot going through, but they could pitch absolutely crucial innings in Omaha. And we saw that with Arizona, was it 2012, I believe? They won 2-1-2 and then basically were in. And then suddenly their Sunday guy had to throw, a huge game for them, if I'm remembering correctly. But, that's interesting that they decided to go that. Maybe they just said because he didn't pitch last week, because he is a senior, we're just going to bump him up. We're going to give the other guys, extra rest instead of keeping them on a normal, week schedule. Also because, maybe at this time of year, you want to just, hey, if we can get an extra day of rest for our guys, why not? And because you have Eichhoff being a senior, that could be the reasons. But that's really interesting that they did decide to make that move. The one thing with the setup of this tournament, you mentioned, if you fall in loser's bracket, your depth is going to be challenged, right? But if you stay in the winner's bracket, you can go with 2 pitchers basically. to the finals. Like, it sets up where you're playing every other day. So that gives you time, breathing room for your starters to rest up, heal up, and go. And maybe they go on a day short rest or something. But if you have two guys that you rely on, that can work. And if your starters can go, if Krimkowski and Smith Bailey can go decent innings, that means your bullpen can be that much more rested. Okay, Tony Pluta doesn't have to throw 3 days in a row. He's throwing 3 times, but it's over a 5-day period instead of over a 3-day period. Like, that is huge for your relievers when you're using guys for an inning. You expect an inning out of them basically per game, like you do with Pluta, like you do with Hintz. You're expecting those guys to, in average, they're going to give you an inning per game. So I think this schedule can set up fairly nicely for them if they stay in the winner's bracket. So it'll be interesting, and it'll be a great matchup. Just the fact that it is the rematch of 2016, that whole thing. And I wonder if some coach from LSU may wander over and just reminisce a little bit, seeing those two teams play against each other as well.
So I was trying to get a question in to Jay Johnson today. Get a half-hour allotment. I'm on Zoom, and the people who are there get priority. So Coastal Carolina's entire half-hour session lasted about 15 minutes. Arizona's lasted 20 minutes. As you can imagine, LSU's went the entire 30 minutes. Tons of questions for Jay, tons of really long, elaborate, well thought out answers. And I didn't get my question in about, it was going to be about that exact thing, what his memories were of that game in 2016. So yeah, it's Coastal against Arizona, and then it's Louisville against Oregon State. So that's one side of the bracket. The other side features the SEC versus SEC matchup of Arkansas against LSU. Those are probably the two co-favorites in the whole thing. And, reseeding the College World Series is another topic for another time. Then you've got UCLA. You're shaking your head. UCLA against Murray State. Now, one might look at UCLA getting UTSA and then getting Murray State and saying, man, like, these guys have gotten lucky. Murray State has proven to be a very plucky team. They went down to Duke and they beat them at their ballpark. This is a really good and talented UCLA team that had this monster recruiting class, and those guys are all sophomores now. You covered USC primarily, but you're very familiar with the UCLA program. Both of those schools have had weird deals with their home stadiums. Okay, and John Savage, the UCLA coach, was talking about this quite a bit today during his press availability. So there's some deal with the veterans who have dorms or housing or something in the vicinity of Jackie Robinson Stadium. I'm probably getting this wrong, but there was like an issue where they were like, you guys can't use Jackie Robinson Stadium because this space is needed for the veterans. And it went to court, and it was this whole thing. And John Savage was saying, like, when the players reported to start school, they had to take everything out of the stadium. They could not use it. They had to come up with a makeshift clubhouse. Their initial workouts were at the intramural field. I mean, look, this is not the worst thing that anyone's ever gone through, but as far as for a college baseball team, that's a pretty decent amount of adversity. And they were able to move back in there in January. And then this thing comes up again, this lease on July 4th. So we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, USC, there was a second year, right, that they're kind of redoing that whole part of campus. They're building a new baseball stadium, reconfiguring it. They've been playing their home games in Irvine for the most part, right? Which, if you're familiar with greater Los Angeles area, is nowhere near USC. But the Trojans were able to break through this year under Andy Stankiewicz and make the tournament for the first time in over a decade. And UCLA had a great year, beat up on the Big Ten, as we would have expected. And super talented team on the other side of the bracket playing Murray State. What are your overall kind of impressions of the Bruins?
Yeah, I mean, I saw them in the fall when I saw them in a high school field where they were practicing. So not the full story, but the quick story there is the stadium is on VA grounds. So because of that, UCLA has to kick back a certain amount to the VA. There's a certain amount of anything that's on VA grounds is supposed to have a certain percentage of usage for veterans. And the judge said that, as well as, I think there was a pool there for a high school, said, this is not supporting the veterans enough. So it goes to court. They basically were without a field the entire fall, so they bounced around to different high schools and stuff. And John Savage actually told me, he said, it is something they will take things away from what happened. They grew as a team much more from those bus rides. And this is similar to what Andy Stankiewicz has said about the group, when they were practicing at El Camino College and stuff. But those challenges that, yes, it's great for the chemistry and the culture. And that was needed for UCLA because it's a very talented group of players, but they got their heads bashed in last year, basically, because there were injuries to some of the older guys. And so they had to play a ton of freshmen. They were not ready for some of the roles that they were given. And so they grew up, though. And then the fall, you get thrown this monkey wrench that says, hey, you can't practice at home. So now you're taking bus rides every day. So, and it's LA traffic. So even though they're going from, Westwood up to, say, the Valley, it's 5 miles, 10 miles, and it's an hour-long drive both ways. It's 45 minutes, whatever it is. So just that extra bonding really helped them. And John Savage told me that, hey, we'll take some things away from it to use for culture building in the future. So I thought that was really interesting when I talked to him in the fall. But the thing that stood out the most from when talking to him in the fall, he said Rock Chalowski did not practice in the fall. Neither did Roman Martin. So they're two key guys on the left side of the infield. He said Rock Chalowski was the biggest leader I've ever had. He didn't practice. Like, that stood out so much to me. And I know how talented Rock Chalowski was. So, you expect him to be really good on the field, but then his leadership, and that's something that's been missing from the UCLA program, I feel like, for the last few years, from, the highly touted recruiting class they've had come in, and then some of them have left and gone to LSU and gone to other places, in the transfer portal after their freshman year. This group stuck around. I talked to Rock Chalowski about it. They played at Maryland to open their Big Ten schedule. And I was like, I know there had to be teams that were fishing out there for you. He said, I never even thought about it. Never even crossed my mind to go anywhere else. I came here with a plan. John Savage has a plan for me, and that's what I'm going to stick with. And that's happened for them. He's been phenomenal. He should be the Golden Spikes Award winner, and he's not a finalist. He is a finalist for a couple other national awards. I don't know, because I guess the Golden Spikes, I'm not going to talk badly about it, but he should be a finalist. I'll just put it that way. He should win the award. He's leading the nation, or actually he's second now in the nation behind Caleb Spur, a center fielder from UConn, in defensive runs saved. So not only is he putting up absolute monster numbers offensively, but he is so smooth at shortstop, and he saved something like 16 runs. He's got his defensive WAR, his offensive WAR. He's got the highest WAR in the nation. So he has been phenomenal for them. But that, they actually took some things away from USC. They looked over across the way and said, hey, what happened to our rivals last year? Because they did not have a field. So USC was a little bit different. They would go to a junior college and practice, but then obviously they're playing games. Now, UCLA got back usage of their stadium before the season started, so they were able to play all their games normal and whatnot. It was just the fall that they were, kind of kicked out. But USC has been on the road, literally on the road the entire season, because they play their home series down in Irvine. So they stay down there in a hotel. They wake up every Friday night, or they go to sleep every Friday night in a hotel for an entirety of a season. So that is challenging in and of itself. Now, USC next season will have a brand new stadium. I've been told that it'll be ready to play. We'll see if all the amenities are done. We had Andy Stankiewicz on a podcast today, and he said we're waiting to see if that all gets finished. But should be spectacular down there, and the playing surface and everything is immaculate already. Their grounds crew does such an amazing job. But really looking forward to seeing how much they continue to grow. That's one of the things, both of these programs, the development from last year to this year for some of their players. I look at some of those freshmen that turned to sophomores this year for UCLA, Mulavai Lavu, Roman Martin, those guys, Phoenix Call. You look at USC, look at Ethan Hedges. He was batting .270 last year with 2 homers. He hit 14 homers this year. He hit 330, 340, and he was also there, had 9 saves on the mound, pitching for the first time for him. And it's going to be a two-way All-American. I think it was a perfect game, second team. I'm sure on D1 Baseball we'll have him on one of our All-American teams. So, the development that those two coaching staffs have been able to produce with some challenges and just making the most of those challenges. And now USC, I think, with them being back on campus, they got a boost halfway through the season because they got to actually go back and practice on the new Dado, at least the surface of it. Once construction was done each day, they could go out and practice. I told them they got to get out there with the hard hats on in practice, just to follow along with the theme or whatever. But the fact that they'll be able to go do extra work, go do like those things weren't available to them the last 2 years, because they would go to El Camino College and somebody may say, hey man, I want to get some more extra cuts. I want to get some extra ground balls. Somebody's got to get back to class. We all got to get back on the bus. Everyone's got to go. So that is something that will be different. They had some inflatable batting cages, so they did as much as they could this year, but I'm really interested to see the continued, ascension of that program from being awful for almost 2 decades to Andy Stankiewicz takes over and he's won 30 plus games in 3 straight years, which is the first time they've done that since the turn of the century. So really excited about where both of those programs are going. And the other thing that is really interesting, and you got a chance to listen to the press conference, I did not, but wonder if John Savage was asked about his contract situation, because his contract expires at the end of this year. So what is UCLA going to do there? They have $1 million coach. I don't know that they want to pay $1 million for their baseball coach anymore. So if not, do they come to an agreement? Does John Savage go somewhere else? Because he's one of the best baseball coaches on the West Coast. He's been doing it for 20 plus years at UCLA. Does someone else get an opportunity to scoop him up? That could change the dynamic of the West Coast as well, and the Big Ten, now that UCLA and those 4 West Coast teams are out there. So that should be something that'll be really interesting. And how far can they go this weekend or this week to put even more pressure on the administration to try to keep them around?
Yeah. So what happens in a situation like that, obviously, is the portal becomes something to watch, right? Because if John Savage leaves and he goes someplace else, or if he just leaves or retires or whatever, like a lot of guys who, told you that they had no interest in looking elsewhere, they might start to look elsewhere, right? Now Shotgun has access to fancy stats like defensive runs saved. I'm just looking at fielding percentage here, and I believe I have this right. 7 of the 8 teams in the College World Series are in the top 30 in the country in fielding percentage. Arkansas is 2nd. Oregon State is number 7. UCLA is number 8. LSU is number 11. Murray State is right around 20. Arizona is right around Arizona's 25. So I always say you got to be able to play catch, right? That's where it all starts. I don't think we think of Oregon State necessarily as a fielding team because they're so explosive offensively. I mean, we saw, that game against Florida State that decided, it seemed like every other swing was a home run, right? I mean, it was ridiculous, but you got to see them up close and personal. That's the last team I want to ask you about here before we get to our predictions for what's going to happen in Omaha. Quick thoughts on Oregon State.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Oregon State. You talk about the defense, AJ Singer and Ivar Arquette up the middle. Now, Ivar Arquette was a second baseman at Washington, but man, is he super smooth up there. Even though he's 6'4" and he looks like a monster playing shortstop, you're like, why is that giant guy over there? But he's just so fluid with the way he goes, especially to his left going up the middle. And the AJ Singer is a guy I didn't know much about necessarily, a JUCO guy that went to Oregon State, and he had a couple of really nice plays in that regional that kind of changed the complexion because he started double plays on really hard hit balls. He caught one by his ear on a bad bounce on a hard ball that, normally that one's going and it's going into the gap for potential extra bases. And now maybe that changes the dynamic of a game. Instead, fields it by his ear, starts the, the flip and gets the double play. So I was impressed with their defense. Wilson Weber behind the plate has been really good as well, throwing out runners and different things. I think he's been done a really good job. And it's interesting, last year he was splitting time with Tanner Smith. I just saw Tanner Smith this past week because he was catching for Miami. He transferred to Miami because he wanted to get more playing time instead of splitting time with Wilson Weber. And both of them had really good years and helped lead their teams, at least the Super Regionals for Miami and to Omaha for Wilson Weber and the Beavers. But yeah, the offense, the 2 through 5, or at least it was 2 through 5 at the end of the regional. Now it's different because Mitch Canham loves to mix things up. But the collection of 4 guys between Trent Carraway, who has fluctuated. He started the season leadoff. He went down. He slid all the way down the lineup to 9 because he was really struggling until the last couple weeks or last couple games of the regular season, and then going to the regional. In the regional, he hits 5 homers in 5 games. He had a huge grand slam in that clinching game against Florida State. He's changed the dynamic of that lineup because now it just lengthens out so much. And you put him in the leadoff spot, and then you can have, you got Ivar Arquette behind him. Then you got Gavin Turley. Then you got Weber. And all those guys have been really good. That trio I just mentioned right there, they're all hitting at least 333, all with at least 12 homers, all with at least 12 doubles, and have all driven in at least 57 runs. Like, they produce. And it's hard to hit contact over and over and over. I was doing the regional preview. I hadn't seen Oregon State in person this season, but I said, Ivar Arquette is the guy that's going to be a top 10 draft pick, likely, maybe top 15. But I said, he's the next guy that's going to be the early round draft pick for Oregon State, but he's not necessarily the guy that scares you like Adley Rutschman did or Travis Bazzana did. But then watching him, it doesn't scare you in the fact that, man, this guy's going to crush the ball out of the park. Wilson Weber, when he's hot, does that. Trent Carraway, when he's hot, does that. But Ivar Arquette is just constantly just hits ropes everywhere, and his fly balls just keep going. You're just like, oh, that's a fly. Oh, wait, okay, maybe that went out. And his first home run at Goss Stadium had hit all of his home runs on the road this season. Now they played a ton of road games, but I got his first one in the regional, so they were super excited about that. But he's been super smooth. He's taken a huge jump, and that just shows you the development of that program. That's something that stands out year over year. There is that they get some big name prospects. Trent Carraway was a big name coming out of high school. But Bazzana coming out of Australia wasn't a 1-1 type of guy. Adley Rutschman was a punter on the football team, and that was his primary role initially when he first got to Arizona, or Oregon State. So they produce by developing. And what else stood out to me about Oregon State, I mean, the lineup just talked about is really deep and can scare you because they can do it in different ways. Those guys at the top can mash. And then you get to the guys in the middle lineup, and they beat USC one game and started chanting small ball, because they bunted 3 or 4 times in one inning and scored 3 runs off of it, because they can do that too. And they're dynamic in that way that they can beat you in different ways offensively. But on the mound, now Dax Whitney is going to start on the first game. The freshman, he's got electric stuff. The breaking ball, the 2 breaking balls are both legit. He's 95 to 97, maybe a little bit higher with the adrenaline of Omaha going. But I saw him. I mean, he struck out 111 batters now in 71 innings, and it's elite stuff. Now you can get to him. You can push his pitch count up early in a game, and that's the one knock on him right now. So they've actually kind of piggybacked him with Nelson Keljo, who was their Friday starter initially. Now, Dax Whitney was their Saturday guy for the most part, and then now they're going to bump him up to the opener of the series. But Keljo comes in, and he's got an electric fastball from the left-hand side. But when he got to second or third time through the lineup, he would start struggling. So now they put him in the pen where he was outstanding for them last year and the year before. So that's created a dynamic duo between those two from the right side and the left side. And then Ethan Kleinschmidt as well, and then Eric Segura has some struggles. That was really a cool scene for him to struggle against St. Mary's. He ends up losing that game, gets knocked out in the first inning, comes back and finishes off or throws 3 or 4 innings against USC in the regional final. And he's a guy that's up to 97. All their arms that they brought in against USC, this was the biggest thing that I saw as an area USC has to get better, is the depth of talent. They were on their 5th game. USC was on their 4th game, and everybody that Oregon State was bringing in was 94, 95. And USC is bringing in guys that are 90, 92. That's a huge difference. And just legit breaking balls. They got guys in the bullpen: Wyatt Queen, Kellen Oakes, Leif Palmer. They got guy after guy after guy they can bring in. So they're really deep, both on the mound and in the lineup. It's a scary team to face, even if there's not one guy that you go, oh, that guy, we can't let that one guy beat us, because he's so scary in the middle of the lineup. They're just pieces upon pieces upon pieces.
Maybe that's why they're so dangerous. So I made a prediction, wrote it down before we started the podcast, and I went in D1 baseball and looked up the staff predictions, had no idea what Shotgun was going to pick. And of course, we have the same prediction. We're both picking Oregon State to beat LSU in the College World Series. That is not, of course, the matchup that I would like to see the most. Arizona versus LSU would be the spiciest one for fans here in Tucson for sure. And I think people would really appreciate an Arizona UCLA matchup. I mean, long time West Coast rivals kind of battling it out in baseball forever in the Pac-12. That would be pretty cool too. But I am going with the Beavers over the Tigers. I cannot pick LSU to win the College World Series on an Arizona podcast, Shotgun, because I get a lot of hate mail for that if I did it. But that is an extremely talented team with like two really good pitchers on the front end of things, and we know Jay Johnson. He's been here and done that, right? He's experienced everything he can in the College World Series, and he really knows how to manipulate his roster. Real quick before we close out here, why Oregon State over LSU?
So I actually had LSU over Oregon State. So I believe.
Are you sure?
I believe. Right. I mean, I'll go back to my original bracket before.
I'm looking right here.
Did I change? I might have changed my mind.
You've got Oregon State.
Okay. See, this is how confident I am in my picks here. Originally, I had LSU over Oregon in the final with my pre-regional bracket.
Okay, yeah.
So
that worked out well.
I just had to add a state, and I guess I flipped my decision there. I only got two of the final 8 teams. I got UCLA and LSU making it into the College World Series. So my Northeastern pick did not pan out so well, unfortunately, there. But I think Oregon State, just having seen them in the regional and seeing them, I wouldn't say necessarily at their worst, but seeing them play bad and play super tight, intense, and how Mitch Canham was able to loosen them up and get them to play at full throttle for the next 7 games. It was super impressed with that, and they already have the talent. And that's the thing you worry about with a talented team, especially one that has the pedigree of Oregon State, the tradition they've had the last 20 years, taking over as the best West Coast team, West Coast program. Arizona fans, you guys can debate that if you want, but 3 national championships stands out. Being that, having that pedigree, and Mitch Canham not reaching that point yet, not getting to Omaha. So there's that pressure. And Mitch Canham, I talked to him before the regional started, and there's this pressure on him to, if he gets knocked out in 2 games, there are going to be a ton of people calling for him to be fired. Instead, now he'll probably get a contract extension. That's the way things work. You win a couple games, and that's the difference. But the way that he was able to shake off the loss to St. Mary's, to fall in the losers bracket, and have to win 4 straight games, I was really impressed by what they were able to do. And I don't think that they'll be shaken by the moment, by the elements of TD Ameritrade, or not TD Ameritrade. What is it? The Chuck Wagon, Charles Schwab.
Charles Schwab, yep.
But I think that they're an offense that can win in any location. They can win when the sun is out and the ball is flying. They can win the small ball game, and they're used to the rain. So if it starts raining and it gets sloppy, they can win that game too. So that's what impressed me about Oregon State, and that's probably what forced me to change my mind. On the other side, LSU is just so talented. Like, just that it stands out so much. I mean, Arkansas is the other team, and theirs is from the transfer portal primarily. LSU got a ton of freshmen to come in. Jay, did a tremendous job of being able to sell his program and getting those kids to come in. But the front line, you have 2 legit dudes in Cade Anderson, who may be the number 1 pitcher off the board in the MLB draft, and then UC San Diego transfer, because of course the West Coast has to supply LSU with their talent. Anthony Iacin has been phenomenal for them. Was a Team USA guy last year and was expected some big things from them. But I had Jay on my podcast before the season, and the roles were not set. He knew Cade Anderson would be a guy in their rotation, and expected Chase Shores to have a big role. But other than that, they didn't know who was going to be able to fill what roles. And Anthony Ianson's run with one of those starting roles have been fantastic. I mean, those 2 guys have combined for 300 strikeouts. 300 strikeouts, but two pitchers combined. Now, they've thrown 200 innings, but still, that's super impressive. And on the offensive side, Derek Curiel being a West Coast guy, Stephen Milam, Monster Milam being a West Coast guy, like they got their West Coast talent. The West Coast schools got to start to keep Jay away from him, from all the talent out on the West Coast. But yeah, they're just super talented. They did a great job picking up some pieces along the way in the transfer portal and stuff that have been impact players for them as well. But it starts with their young guys and getting Jared Jones back. I mean, when you got a guy that hits 20 plus home runs and he doesn't go in the draft and you get to bring him back, like that's a huge boost as well. So they're super talented, and that's why I have them coming out the other side. Even though Arkansas is the other team to watch there, they just have so much pitching. That should be a knockout, drag out type of game. And then whoever gets sent to that losers bracket is going to have to play UCLA or Murray State, and that's not going to be fun for either one of them as they try to fight their way back to play the other one in the winners bracket.
Yeah, one of the two SEC teams is going to have to go through the losers bracket. That's just the way that it is. Shotgun, this has been so much fun. It's great to catch up with you. I always love seeing you out and about covering college baseball. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find your work besides D1 Baseball, which is just one of the places where Shotgun's content is liable to appear. So listen.
So you can catch me on D1 Baseball, of course. You can catch on my college baseball tweets at Shotgun SPR D1, as is on the screen. But for all other stuff, for USC stuff, for my own just personal thoughts, that's all at Shotgun SPR. And then you can catch me at uscfootball.com for USC stuff. On Instagram, I'm on all those social medias doing different things. But you have a question, you have a concern, you have a thought, feel free to hit me up.
Yeah, this is our guy, Shotgun. Great dude, very, very knowledgeable college baseball reporter, as you could tell from the content of this podcast. We thank Shotgun so much for joining us on the eve of the College World Series. Just a reminder that you can find the Wildcast podcast on Apple, on Spotify. You can check out the video version on our website at Tucson.com. Enjoy the baseball, everybody. And you know what? You can listen to this podcast. It'll hold through the weekend. Okay. Even if you've not catching up to it until after Friday's games are over, there's plenty of content on multiple participants in Omaha that will still be of great value to you. Thanks again to Shotgun. Thanks to everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.